So today we're going to pick up on part 2 of this series that we did. The first part was for the elementary school kids, grades 1 through 8, and now we're going to talk about the high schoolers and trying to really understand them, because part of managing their behavior is not discipline like we would for the younger kids, but really trying to understand why their behavior is the way that it is. So in this process, we're going to try to figure out why teens act out, then understand their emotions a little bit and how that kind of results in poor behavior, and then how to communicate effectively with our teens. Again, it's not going to be discipline like it is for children. And then how, again, just like we talked about the kids, it has to be effective and consistent in order for it to lead to good behavior. So why are teens disruptive? If I could summarize this whole hour or 45 minutes that we're going to talk about, you could summarize it in these two things. There's a lot of change occurring, okay, and at the same time, there's a lot of time for exploration. And we'll see that this is a very short period of time, but... Sure. Okay. You need some books? Sure. Then I'll block them. Would it be easier if I sit so you can all see? Is this better? Okay. Is that better? Lower? Too high, too low? Okay. So if I could summarize, everybody see okay now? Everything's fine? Okay. So if I could summarize again this whole talk, this next 45 minutes or this next hour, it'll be just summarized into these two words. Lots of changes occurring, lots of time for exploration. And so we have to try to kind of navigate these rough waters for them as they go through this process. Teens today are going through a lot of changes that sometimes we didn't go through when we were growing up. It's a very fast-paced world out there. There's lots going on. They're involved in lots and lots of things. Unlike when we were growing up, also, you can connect to the world at anywhere, at any time, from any place. They connect through the internet. They connect through social networking sites. They connect through blogs, cell phones, text messages, emails, all things that, again, they're bombarded with. They're also getting conflicting messages from a lot of different people. Sometimes from the church is going to be different than what their friends are saying, different than what magazines are saying, different from even what their older siblings, younger siblings are saying. So they're getting all these conflicting messages from all over the place. They're also trying to desperately fit in. It's an identity thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about identity in a little bit. But they're also trying to figure out who they are. And it's a very short period of time again, but they're trying in this short time to really figure out who they are. At the same time as all of this is going on, they're also trying to make life-altering decisions in terms of what classes to take in school that's going to lead them to good classes in college. They begin thinking about careers and long-term choices and jobs. They're also changing from becoming a child into becoming an adult. And on top of all that, if that isn't enough, there's also lots of biological changes, and we'll talk about that too. So adolescence is a very confusing time. It's actually a period of storms and stresses. This was first stated by one of the early American psychologists, G. Stanley Hall. And in this period of storms and stresses, there's a lot of conflict with parents and other authority figures because they're trying to exert their independence. Again, they're starting to feel that they're no longer children, so they conflict with parents and adults to try to gain independence. At the same time, there's a lot of mood disruptions as a result of biological changes. And again, we'll talk about that in specifics as well. And on top of all that, they also do some risky behaviors. First of all, it's hard for them to think things through. And it's also, again, an attempt to gain identity and to fit in. If you look at the word adolescence in Latin, if you break it down, it actually means to grow into adulthood. So you don't just jump from being a child into being an adult, you actually have to grow into that process. So adolescence is generally thought of that 4 years in high school. But this has actually changed in recent years. So if you think about it, in the first part of this 4 years, they start off as kids. They're still kids. They're still asking mom and dad for a lot of things. They're asking people for a lot of advice. And as they grow more and more, they grow more and more into lots of responsibility, lots of independence. They're having more responsibilities like driving, voting, choosing colleges, making their own decisions, learning where the boundaries are, what's right, what's wrong. And actually, the period of adolescence has extended in the last 40 or 50 years from just that period of 14 to 18 into mid-20s. And that's because a lot of kids are going to school longer, going to graduate programs, maybe even returning home, living with their parents. So the period of adolescence has actually been extended. It's no longer just 14 to 18, but maybe even into the mid-20s. So we'll break it down into the changes that are occurring during this period. One of the first changes is biological. At the beginning of adolescence, at age 13, 14, you're having the onset of puberty. You may notice that children that are growing out of the phase of just wanting to be around their parents all the time, they have a greater need for privacy. There's a lot of physical, hormonal changes that are occurring that can be kind of strange for them. There's also cognitive development, so things happening in their brain as well. Their memory is starting to improve. Their problem-solving abilities are starting to improve. They're more sophisticated in their thinking. They can think hypothetically. They're able to think ahead more. They're able to think more abstractly, more logically, and we'll talk about each of these in more detail. And then there's also changes socially. As they enter into society, there's more rites of passages, again, voting, driving, rites of passages that have to do with coming of a certain age. And also starting of relationships with other genders, as opposed to having just same-gender friends before this. So in terms of biology, the most interesting thing I read when I was reading about adolescents is they are growing at the same fast rate as toddlers. So toddlers, you notice that they change a lot very quickly. They go from just wanting to be held all the time to changing into little explorers that are running around trying to explore the world around them. And adolescents are much of the same. They are growing at a very fast rate in a very short period of time, and that's confusing, especially because now their brain processes are trying to catch up. So your endocrine system or your hormone system is on very high alert. It's trying to create a lot of hormones to pass you through this period of adolescence. And this actually starts to affect moods. When there's a lot of hormone changes, there's a lot of chemical changes in the brain, causes a lot of mood changes. It's been shown that increased testosterone in boys has been related to irritability, impulsivity, aggression. In girls, increased estrogen is related to depression. So some of the mood changes that they're experiencing is out of their control. It's not their fault they're experiencing. That doesn't mean they can't control it. But it's almost something that is natural and out of their control. Also, there's physical appearances that are changing during puberty. This may be difficult to adjust to. Teenagers, especially girls, may start having body image issues, comparing themselves to other girls. Depending on if the person is maturing early or maturing late, this may cause a problem with their peers as well. If they're not looking like their peers, if they're looking a little different, acting a little different, they may feel out of place. In addition to this, there's cognitive changes. Again, their thought processes start to change. So in the beginning, children actually try to think more in the here and now, in the present. They can't see the future. They can't plan for the future. Teenagers tend to start thinking more hypothetically. Because this is a developing process, there may be some faulty thinking in this process. So even though this plays an important role in decision making and planning ahead, it's difficult for them to kind of do this. The next one is thinking about abstract things. So they start thinking about really deep subjects, politics, religion, morality. Where do they fall on this spectrum? And they're, again, trying to find their place in the world, and so they ask lots of questions, and they hope to get an idea of where their place is. They also start to think more introspectively. They think more about their own thoughts. And this is a very confusing process, too, because they think they have this audience all the time. People are constantly watching them. This is where some of the self-consciousness comes in. Self-conscious is a body image of what people think of them. They also think that they're all alone in their experiences. Nobody can understand what I am going through. This is because, again, they're thinking more about their internal processes. They're also able to think in multiple dimensions. So while children can focus only on concrete things, they can focus on multiple dimensions. This is why they can get sarcasm and different kinds of humor that they couldn't get before. And that's an interesting thought process as well. And the next one's very important as well. Children see things as black and white, and adolescents start to see things not as just black and white. There's lots of gray area. So for this reason, they ask, again, lots of questions. They want to find things out on their own. And when people try to tell them things, they often don't want to listen because they want to explore on their own and find things on their own. So this can actually cause a little rebellion stage for a lot of teenagers. Okay. And we'll get to this point again in a little bit later, but I just wanted to bring it up here because we'll talk about this again and again. Adolescents that are in a secure relationship with adults, not just their parents, but also their Sunday school teachers, their teachers at school, tend to have a lot more guidance in their life. They tend to be more secure, have more self-confidence, have a better body image, have better relationship with their peers and adults. They're able to make more correct decisions, and they're able to reason better. So it's really important to have good, consistent, secure relationships with adults. Other processes in the brain that are kind of developing, so we have to be patient with them, is attention. If you ask them things more than once, again, these processes are developing. Memory is improving, but still not the best it can be. Same with processing speed, same with organization. So when you ask them things more than once in class or outside of class, be patient. They're still growing and developing and trying to organize a lot of different things. So these processes are still developing. We also need to look at different kinds of intelligences. Sometimes when we think about adolescents, we really push them to be well in school, and that's really, really important, of course. But it's also really important to look at different kinds of intelligence because they may have talents in other areas. There's actually at least 7 kinds of different intelligence, not just verbal and mathematics, which you study in school, but also spatial kind of things. Some people can process things spatially really well. Others can do really well with movement, so sports, being able to position themselves in certain ways. Some are also really philosophical and self-reflective. So if you see some of these things, again, it's important to foster these behaviors in these teenagers in school and in Sunday school and outside of Sunday school. Also, others may be really sensitive to other people's needs and be really open to being kind to others and being sensitive to others and that kind of thing. And also some may be musical. It's actually argued that there may be an 8th form of intelligence, which is really part of that introspective, looking at themselves kind of nature. And knowing their emotions, knowing how to manage their emotions, also recognizing emotions in others. That helps them to manage a relationship with others and then motivate themselves to achieve certain goals. So there may be up to 8 forms of intelligence. Also, we want to help them look at the key emotions and kind of break down where their emotions are. The key emotions are happiness, anxiety and fear, depression and sadness, and anger. So it's really important, again, to help them break down their emotions into where they fall in these categories. It's really hard for teenagers sometimes to pinpoint their emotions, and for us who have more verbal capabilities and know what our emotions are to kind of help them verbalize those things. It helps as well. We also may notice that at this stage, adolescents are taking lots of risks. And when adolescents and adults make decisions, they look at things in certain ways. They try to identify all the choices that are available to them. Then they want to identify all of the consequences for each choice. So some of the consequences may be if my friends tell me to do this and I don't think it's necessarily the best thing to do, the consequences could be I could get really hurt if I try this, or the consequences could be I will lose my friends if I don't try this. So they try to look at all the choices. Then they evaluate the desirability of each choice. Well, if I get hurt, that won't be fun. But if I lose my friends, that won't be fun either. So which one should I choose? Then they look at the likelihood of each consequence. Okay, if I don't pay attention to what my friends are telling me, then maybe they won't like me anymore. But is that really likely? If they're really my good friends, will they still like me? And then once they've combined all this information, then they're able to make a decision. Well, for adults, this is a little bit easier and works a little bit faster. They can make these decisions and they're not necessarily concerned as much with what people are saying. But with adolescents, they feel they're invincible. So they may try something that's a little bit risky because they feel they're invincible. And also because, again, their cognitions, their brain processes are still working. They're still trying to grow to the best of their ability. They're more likely to accept risky behavior due to faulty reasoning. So they may have faulty reasoning in any one of these areas, and they may make poor decisions. So again, adults go through this process fairly quickly. Adolescents take more time, and because they're still processing, they may make the wrong decision in the process. On top of all the biological and the cognitive changes, there's also social changes. Again, you're starting off as a child in the beginning of adolescence, and then there's a lot of changes in their relationships and in interpersonal behaviors. First, they begin to kind of separate from the parent or from adults in general. They start having interest in the opposite gender, but still are forming strong relationships with the same gender. They have lots of social, cultural, historical, practical information that is being passed down at a very fast rate. Information from school, information from church, information from their peers, from their friends, from all this information is being passed down to them. Other changes that start to happen towards the end are they're exiting church, they're exiting school, they're entering into the labor force eventually. They may be departing from home. And again, since adolescence has expanded into the late 20s, towards the end of this you may see marriage and then establishing of their own household. So lots of social changes, again, are happening in a very short period of time. From families and adolescents, adolescents can get the greatest information on their identity, their autonomy or their independence, how much they achieve. They can grow the best psychologically, and they can develop great values. And families is not just the family that they grow up with at home, but again, their extended family through church, through other places like that are healthy and helpful for them as well. There's also a youth culture that is starting to develop in looking at adolescents and their peers. This youth culture develops because there's a lot of similar values happening, especially if they're going to the same school, if they're attending the same programs. There's similar attitudes, similar belief systems, similar experiences, so they start to understand each other a lot more than parent to child or adult to child. They're also spending a lot of time with their peers, a lot more time than sometimes even with their parents. Whether we like it or not, there's times where there's less adult supervision, and this kind of leads to experimentation of things that may not be the best things for them. There's also interest in maybe different friends than they were used to before. Again, they're trying to explore, trying to find their place in the world. Also at this age, there's beginning to be broken up into smaller mini-cultures. And there's the in-group, out-group phenomenon, which they try to ostracize people that are not in their mini-culture. And again, they're trying to find an identity, so they may find it within a small group. All things that are normal, but things to keep in mind so that we can look at some things that may not be very helpful for them. Also in developing identity, a lot of emotional difficulties can occur here. So first, there is the view of self, of how someone perceives themselves when they're all by themselves, when they're not with the adults, when they're not with other teenagers, when they're not at church. They have a view of who they are. Maybe positive and maybe negative. Then they have a view of themselves as how others view them. So maybe people at church see me this way, people at school see me this way, people in my peer group see me this way. Then they have perceptions of how they think others see them. So not exactly how others see them, but how they believe others see them. Again, people may see them positively, but they feel that people see them negatively. So this can get really confusing as well. And then they have an ideal self. What's their ultimate goal? What do they eventually want to accomplish? And sometimes there's conflicts in between these things. So their view of themselves in their private time is different from their ultimate goal. So this causes a lot of emotional turmoil as well. We want to try to kind of reconcile all these so that they're all the same or very similar to each other. But if they're not, then they start having emotional difficulties.
What's the difference between the objective and the self?
Objective is how actually people outside see them. So people may see them as coming to church and praying, so they perceive them as good. But how they think other people see them is different than how people actually see them. So objective is how people actually see them. Perceived is how they think people see them. Okay, those could be two different things. Is that a little clearer? Okay. So again, there's a lot of emotional turmoil that could occur if these are not all in tune with each other. They search for identity through their families. They look for acceptance. They look for love. They look for ways to kind of develop their identity. They can also search through status symbols. You often see teenagers trying to fit in by wearing popular clothes or trying to fit in, in that kind of way. So through status symbols. They also may try to search for their identity through grown-up behaviors, which is not always a positive thing. Again, they're trying to experiment, and that's why sometimes they want to grow up faster than they actually are. Through rebellion, like we talked about a little bit ago, rebellion is a form of trying to experiment, trying to figure things out on their own, and no matter who tells them otherwise, rebellion is a form of them trying to, again, explore and learn more about themselves. They take a lot of their opinions from their peers, through role models, whether that's through someone who's on television or someone who's a teacher or someone who they can emulate and try to look up to. So we want to try to be good role models. And also, again, through cliques, the in and the out groups. So they try to identify, well, if I'm in the cool crowd, then I'm a good person. If I'm not in the cool crowd, then I'm not a good person. Again, all things that we want to try to work on to help them feel included as opposed to excluded. What happens with these teens when they kind of struggle with their identity? Well, some of them will hold in their feelings, and they'll shut down, and you won't be able to kind of get in. And as we get towards the end of this talk, we'll see how we can sort of break through that wall. Others will act out. They'll take their anger and their aggression and put it on somebody else, or deny that there's a problem, or regress back to an earlier stage when they felt more comfortable. Others will try to find a way to work through the problem. Sometimes they'll ask for help, sometimes they won't. They may feel too burdened by responsibility. This is, again, a very confusing time, so they may not ask for the best solutions or ask people for help. They may feel guilt and shame, and there's actually a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is associated towards a specific object. Shame is just a general feeling of worthlessness. Okay? They also may feel anxious or depressed, and they may feel that no one understands. If you remember that earlier slide where we said they feel their experiences are unique to them and nobody else in the world understands. So we want to make them feel like we do understand. So here are some ways to help our teens, and we'll go through a few slides of this. First thing is to be warm, to really have a good relationship with them, and be genuine. If you're fake with them, they will pick up on that. They're very intelligent. You also want to be empathic. Put yourself in their shoes. Remember, they're going through a lot of changes, a lot of different experiences. They're trying to process all these things. Their brain is trying to catch up to what's actually happening. So be empathic. Put ourselves in their shoes. And listen. And listen means asking for questions for clarification, not just jump into conclusions, but actually genuinely listening to what they have to say. In order to help teens, we can do these 5A things. First thing is we need to anticipate that they need guidance. So we need to establish a relationship with them before there is even a problem. You can't imagine how hard it is to try to get into breaking down this wall if you don't already have a relationship established. So establish a relationship before there's even a problem. Ask direct questions, but in a non-threatening way. If they feel threatened, they're not going to come to you again. All it takes is one time. You need to also advise them, even if they're not asking for it. Even if they're not asking for advice. This is where you talk to them about things like drugs, about peer pressure, about other friends that may not be doing things that are appropriate. So giving them advice even before they ask for it. If you don't do that, they'll get their information from someone else. You also want to physically help them with the problem. Not just say you're going to help and then not do it, but physically help with the problem, whatever that problem is. And then do a follow-up. Arrange for a follow-up time to talk with them and make sure that you follow through, because if you just drop it, again, they're not going to come back to you because you didn't follow up. So it's really important to arrange for a follow-up. Other things that you can do is listen. Like we said, listening is really important. If you listen very carefully, and listening does not mean interrupting or having your own agenda, but listening really means just to listen. You can really uncover hidden feelings. You can take away the fear of this negative feeling that they may be experiencing. You may help the adolescent hear their own problems so they can begin to solve it. When they talk about it, they're already starting to formulate ideas about what they want to do. And it helps you, again, to learn more about them. If you're not listening, you're not learning. 2 mistakes that people make in listening. They can drift off, start thinking about what they're making for dinner tonight instead of actually listening. So they're not gaining a very deep understanding of what's going on. Another thing is they're only listening for the obvious. They're assuming through what they're hearing that something bad is going to come out of this. So don't assume, don't listen for the obvious, listen to what they're actually saying and ask for clarification so you can make sure you got the story right. Why does advice sometimes fall on deaf ears with teenagers? Well, sometimes the advice can be self-centered. It's about you, not about them. The advice really has to be about them. Again, if you're empathic, you're putting yourself in their shoes, it shouldn't be about you, it should be about them. The advice can also make the teen feel worse. Again, they're already having identity crises and they're trying to figure out who they are. And if the advice is really negative and kind of puts them down, then it's going to be very difficult for them to listen to the advice. If you make them feel like you don't understand, then again, you're not being empathic. If the advice is threatening or boring or not timed right, they're not going to listen. Also, the advice may be too costly. So maybe you tell them, don't hang out with these group of friends anymore. And you mean well. Okay, maybe these friends really aren't good for them. But for them, if you process how they're processing it, this is too costly. They're going to lose a group of friends that they really care about. So you have to approach it a different way so that they can see it from your point of view and not just don't see these people anymore and that's it. When you're helping teens, you got to listen, you got to be non-judgmental, you got to tell them and show them that you care. You have to allow them to be independent or autonomous, but at the same time letting them know right from wrong. You have to tell them that no matter what, you will always be there. Okay? Expect that they're going to make some mistakes along the way, but you have to be there when they do. You want to let them explore their interests, again, that 8 forms of intelligence, so they can figure out what their identity is, and let them know that each one of them is unique. But again, you have to tell them right from wrong. You have to be consistent and united. So if you have 4 teachers in one group, in one class, you all have to be united. And you have to be consistent. One person can't say one thing, and then the other 3 say something else. It's confusing. And finally, you have to explain. It's not because I said so. It's not because I know better. It's not because I'm smarter and older and wiser, but there has to be an explanation behind it. In order to be helpful, you've got to be a role model. You've got to recognize that there is a problem and pinpoint the severity of that problem. Pick your battles. Not every problem is huge. Some problems are less huge. So pinpoint the severity of the problem. Help them to stop and think. Help them to not be so impulsive. Again, this is a growing process. They're going to be impulsive. But if you kind of slow them down and help them to start thinking about the problem, they can start to solve it a little bit better. You also want to decide on a goal, and not just any goal, but a reachable goal, and a goal that you came up with together. A goal that you came up with together is going to sound a lot better for them because they participated in the process. You also want to generate a list of possible solutions. So maybe sit down with them and come up with an entire list of solutions to this problem. Help them to consider all the consequences of those things that you generated, and then choose a solution that's a good one. All this stuff obviously takes time, but it helps to kind of break it down this way. Then you do the solution that you picked, and then again you have to follow through. You have to reevaluate. Did the solution work? If it didn't work, what can I do to fix it? You may be starting all over again. Feelings of inferiority are very common during the adolescent years. Again, they're trying to fit in. They're trying to be involved in a group that will help them to fit in. So a way to kind of combat some of these things is to help them develop positive self-statements based on their real talents. If you're focusing on those 8 areas of intelligence, you should be able to pick up on what their real talents are. This will help them to develop positive self-statements based on those talents. If they have unrealistic standards or non-reachable goals, make the goals more manageable. Okay? When they accomplish goals that are more manageable or things that they're good at, they'll feel really good about themselves and they'll try to push a little further. If you reach for something too far that they can't reach, they're only going to get discouraged. You want to confront destructive tendencies like getting angry and getting frustrated. Again, that's all part of the growing up process. But you want to confront these difficult tendencies. Explore their questions and answer them thoroughly. This helps them to, again, figure out things that are confusing for them. Teach them problem-solving skills. And also, if they're feeling inferior, at this point is very important to pick where they are inferior. So they can't be inferior in everything, and they also can't be perfect in everything. So figure out where specifically they're feeling inferior. Is it in school? Is it in making friends and making connections? Is it in their body image? Is it in the way that they solve problems? So when you localize these feelings of inferiority, you can kind of figure out where the problem is and tackle that problem as opposed to trying to tackle inferiority generally. And explore where their self-esteem lies. Sometimes teenagers will confuse body image with self-worth. Or if I get an A in my class, that's my self-worth. Again, getting A's and doing well in school is important, but it should not be attached to self-worth. That's a separate thing. Struggle happens because people are expecting perfection. That doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to be as good as we can be. But if we're trying so hard to be perfect, people fall short of that. They get discouraged. If people are overprotective, we probably in this culture are all very overprotective, but we want to let them explore a little bit. Also, being inconsistent is not very helpful. If we model our own negative attitudes towards things, they're going to pick that up. Also, physical influences from outside are going to make things struggle. And again, their faulty thinking processes may make things difficult for them as well. Bad parenting, and we can include this as bad ways of doing service as well. Poor communication. If we don't trust them or respect them. If we don't change the rules or responsibilities with age, sometimes we still think that they're kids, but they're not. Not providing enough comfort, not being patient, expecting, again, perfection. You want to try to be the best that you can be, but not pushing so hard that they get discouraged. Rejecting or neglecting them. Again, if you're overprotective, you're not teaching responsibility. If you're overindulgent, giving them everything that they want, this leads to selfish and demanding adolescents. If you're overpermissive, that means giving very little rules. Then they're unable to follow the rules of society. If parenting or in teaching is very harsh, this leads to guilt and eventually to rebellion when they see the guilt isn't working. And if it's inconsistent, they have no solid morals to live by. So the chart that I put up before is going to be the best way to do the parenting or the teaching in Sunday school. You want to have a high amount of rules and a high amount of love and respect. And that combination is usually the best one for treating adolescents and children. And it tends to bring them out to be the most respectful and loving children. And finally, we have to be interested and be involved. It is much easier to argue your way for or against something if you're on the inside. If you're constantly alienating them, you're not going to be able to argue your point very well. Try to understand why they listen to the music they listen to. As hard as it is, try to understand. It is easier to make your argument from the inside, from your point of view, than it is from the outside, from your point of view. Try to be non-judgmental. If you're too busy judging, you're not going to have time to really help. Read the Bible together, pray together, attend church. These things are all very helpful, of course. Be a good example and make time for them. And give advice that is helpful, but that can also be seen from their perspective. It's very important that they feel that you understand. If they feel you understand, they may be able to open up a little bit more and explain and understand a little bit more. And that's all. Anybody have any questions? They need to feel like there's a meaning behind what they're doing. It can't just be going and sitting in class and hearing somebody lecture to them. They have to have a meaning and a purpose for what they're doing. At the same time, again, they're coming there to socialize. So for them, it's about social activity. So if we can make the social activities as part of that, but also give them meaning in what they're doing, that combination may be the best way for them to kind of slow down and think about what they're doing and make it relevant to their lives. It's not just, this happened 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. This is very present and important to your life today for this reason. And in that sense, it gives them a little bit of meaning too and helps them to kind of calm down. Disruptions in class and feeding off of each other and getting really excited and not paying attention to the lesson. So again, if they can find a meaning that this is part of their life today, not something that just happened 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and make it relevant to them today, it gives them a sense of meaning and purpose, and at the same time making a social activity for them, because again, their connections with their peers is very, very, very important at this age. So a combination between the two things I think would be important. You're still young. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Uh-huh.
Because we have a lot of young people in classes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're almost like, 2 or 3 years apart. So they're really close. What do you recommend for young people? Because I think they struggle a lot with this. Just trying to be able to discipline kids that are so close to their age.
The question was young people mentoring other young people when there is a very short age difference between the two. I actually tend to think that's more of an advantage than a disadvantage. Those people, because they're also younger, they can fit into the other person's shoes fairly easily. They were there not long ago, and they can kind of convey that to that age group, that I was your age not that long ago. So that may help them to see that, okay, you understand me. Again, when you understand me, then you're not judging me, then you're actually going to help me. So that actually may work to an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage. Again, they want to mentor them by telling them they understand, but also that they have a little bit more removed perspective from them a few years ago. So they can kind of fit in their shoes, but at the same time kind of look out of that experience and kind of give their advice. So again, combining those two messages I think is going to be very helpful as well. I think it's an advantage, not a disadvantage. Yes?
My feeling is there is also overlap between the parents, and we have to make it as a union between the parents and the service in this area,
Absolutely.
this age. As much as we are making it together, it would be so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Something else I think Anita also applies about if we have like 12 or 15 in one class, and I believe everyone is unique
Yes.
and everyone needs to be well understand individually.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we solve this problem? We have like 10 people, 15
Right.
in one class, and everyone is individual,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone needs special attention.
Right.
And the problem happened here.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone needs attention.
I think it's very important for the parents and the teachers to connect. We have parent-teacher meetings. We may want to increase those and hopefully make them more of a connection between the parents and the teachers. Very important. Also, if we have 20 or 30 kids in the class and you're just meeting them on Friday for 2 hours, that is not enough. So maybe we should split up the 4 servants across a few students per servant, and they can get the individual attention that way, and then maybe rotate. So that way the students are getting the individual attention, whether it's, taking them out for coffee or taking them out for lunch or something, as well as meeting on Friday. That way they feel they had the individual attention as well as the group cohesiveness as well. So I think it's important to kind of split them off a little bit into 4 or 5, 6 students per servant and maybe spend some individual time with them, and then also in the group on Fridays.
So you believe it is more important for the servant to visit them individually, not only in the church?
Yeah, I mean, it could be one-on-one time, even if it's a half an hour or an hour, even a month. That's still progress from not just seeing them as a group on one day a week for 2 hours. So yes, it is important to visit. It is important to see them individually if you can. And if you split the service across the 4 or 5 servants in the classroom, it doesn't make it as difficult to do. Other questions? No? Again, that's more difficult to break, but it may be helpful to start individually first and then combine them into smaller groups and then into the larger group on Friday. It's very easy for a person to break down when it's one-on-one than it is to do in a group of 35, 40, sometimes more people. I mean, even for us in here, if I talk to you one-on-one, you're going to be able to open up to me a lot easier than if I told you to tell your whole life story in front of this big crowd. So for adolescents who it's even more confusing and scary and just they don't know what they're thinking at this time, it's helpful to at least start individual and then meet in a bigger group And then hopefully that way they can connect with you and with the other peers as well. So it may be helpful to start individually, even though I know it's hard and time consuming, but that's probably going to be the easiest way to start. To at least get them to break down a little bit and then continue from there. Well, it's very important to understand that there's a lot of strong loyalties at this age. So they're not going to betray their friends no matter what, even if they're doing the worst thing in the world. But you have to also commend them for coming to you. Thank you for coming to me and opening up to me, and this is really helpful. And let's, again, work through the problem together. Let's break it down. Let's think of all the possibilities, and let's kind of work through this problem. Because, again, if they are trusting you and you shut them off somehow, they're not going to come to you again. It all takes is one time. So you have to really encourage them. Thank you for coming to me. I really appreciate you trusting me and opening up to me, and I know that that's hard. But let's break through this problem together and break it down into little pieces until you get to the core of the problem, and then you move through that problem and, again, follow up with it once you've solved it. And come up with a solution together, because it helps them to kind of figure out how to problem solve and fix the problem. But at the same time, so you're giving them this power. At the same time, you're offering your advice from an adult perspective, which is going to help them as well. But always thank them for coming to you and opening up. That's a really great thing because it helps them feel safe. Uh-huh. If it's dangerous in some way, then it may be better to remove them. So if it's a situation where they're doing something dangerous, then obviously remove them from it. If it's not necessarily dangerous, it may be a learning experience for them or something of growth. And there are going to come up times in their life where they're stressed and they have to kind of deal with it. So it may be helpful to help them work through the stress than just to remove them every time they're stressed out. So helping them work through it helps them to create problem solving and abilities to kind of cope with it. Because every time they're stressed at work or they're stressed with a college situation, you can't just pluck them out of that and get them out. So as long as it's not dangerous, you can keep them in there but help them to problem solve at the same time.
Maybe ask about process of father of confession. Know about it.
It's certainly helpful. The fathers of confessions are great at not being judgmental and offering good advice. Again, the most important thing is not to be judgmental. If you're judgmental, they're going to shut off. So fathers of confession knowing about things may be helpful as long as to them it's not scary. So you might want to tell them why it shouldn't be scary. That, Abuna's not going to be judgmental. Abuna's going to be very helpful. Abuna has seen lots of experiences and lots of situations and can offer help. So as long as they don't see it as a scary situation, it could help. The question is about people that don't come very often to Sunday school. Find a way to get them involved. So again, there's 7 or 8 ways of being intelligent. Find a way, give them attention. Find a way to involve them specifically in the process. If they feel important, if they find meaning in what they're doing, they will come. If they feel that nobody cares, nobody's paying attention to me, nobody's looking at my talents, nobody's paying attention to my intelligence, they're not going to come. So get them involved some way that it attaches them to the process. Well, again, kids are going to attach to other kids that are similar to them. So maybe attaching them to other kids that are similar and growing them together as a group and increasing their growth and their self-esteem and finding what they're good at will help them to feel more inclusive in the long run. Because they will attach to other people that are very similar to them. Because again, they don't want to be judged. Judgment is a huge, huge, huge thing for teenagers. So they don't want to be judged, so they will attach to people that are similar to them. Other questions? Again, they are bombarded with 1,000,001 things that we weren't bombarded with when we were growing up. Different messages from different places, from different things. And all of adolescence, whether it was 50 years ago or 10 years from now, it's still a period of storm and stress. So we have to make them understand that we understand. Okay? Even if we're older, and even if we're not in their same age group, we understand. We know that they have these pressures. We know that they're going through these things. And again, if we meet with them individually, we can tackle each of those problems separately. It's very hard to kind of break through that tough surface when they're all one big group, when they're all experiencing the same thing. But if you take one at a time out, you can really help them to see that you understand. And if they see that you understand one-on-one, they're more likely to tell their friends, hey, she's not so bad. She really does understand what I'm saying. Okay? But it's very hard to do that when they're in this mob mentality, this whole big crowd, and you're kind of trying to penetrate it. Try to penetrate it one person at a time first, and then get into the big group after that. It's going to be easier. Absolutely. Being warm, genuine, and loving is key. Absolutely. And being non-judgmental. The people that are trying to disrupt the class are trying to get attention of some sort. If you have a class of 4 servants, you can split the ones that are disruptive from the ones that are non-disruptive. Take the ones that are disruptive out, put them with 1 or 2 servants, and not give them the attention that this is okay, but that you're teaching them in a different form. Maybe they have different needs or different ways of learning, and they can't fit in, so they're acting disruptive. So if you teach them, take a couple servants and maybe split the class a couple times. These people can learn, and these people can learn.
I just had that feeling like if you do it, get it.
Yeah. That's a very good idea. Very good idea. It's because you're not enforcing the disruptive ones and saying, okay, yeah, this is a punishment, so they're getting negative attention. Keep the disruptive ones there and take the good ones out. But find a way to teach these and a way to teach these. These people, there's still people, and these are still people also. So they need to be taught, but maybe in a different way. 7 times 70, like the Bible says. With one person. You have to be patient. It takes time, and adolescence is very turbulent. It takes time. I guess you have to be as patient as you possibly can be. And keep yourself in check. If you feel like you're losing control, remove yourself for a little bit. Because if you lose control, then you're the one that's supposed to be in control. You're the adult. So remove yourself. Go to the bathroom for 5 minutes and come back. But be patient. It takes time. Adolescents are tough, but they can be a lot of fun too. It is. If you need to remove yourself from the situation physically or just by quieting down, do so. It's better to not say anything than say something you'll regret. There's nothing wrong with being quiet. Yes. Again, the best way to describe it, and for everybody it's different, but it's a very confusing time. A time where they're trying to identify who they are. I can bring in different slides some other time to really break it down into different age groups. But in general, they're trying to identify who they are and where they fit in. And that takes time. 4 years, 5 years, and now adolescence has increased to the mid-20s. Yeah, I can bring in more slides. I didn't want to take up too much time, but I can bring in more slides that really break down the age groups. If that would help. Yeah, absolutely. I can email them to the servant list. We have to be creative, absolutely. Again, they're trying to process things more abstractly, more hypothetically than they ever did before. So utilize that. They were kids before. They were thinking very concrete. Things were black and white. You had to tell them things exactly how they happened. Now you can be a little bit more hypothetical. They can understand sarcasm. They can understand jokes. Things are going to be a lot more easier for them to process. But you have to get them involved in a unique way as well, different than when they were children and just thinking concretely. Advice being self-centered. It's about you. I don't want you to, for example, if you think they're hanging out with a group of friends that are going to give you a bad image. So you say, don't hang out with these friends. This is going to make you look bad, which makes me look bad in the long run. So you don't want it to be self-centered. It's not about you. It's about them and giving them the best advice that's going to keep them safe and able to accomplish the things they need to accomplish. Well, for adolescents, again, they're very private in this age. So be patient. That's the first step. Tell them that you understand that they want their privacy, that you're always going to be here to help them when they're ready to talk, that you're not going to judge them. When you tell them these things flat out, it's easier for them to say, okay, well, maybe, hey, it's going to be easier for me to talk to my mom or my dad or my servant. The first feeling of being judged, they're going to run away. So I'm going to keep repeating the judgment thing because it's very important. If they feel that you're judging them, they're going to run away and they're not going to come back. Or it's going to be very hard to draw them back. So if you keep telling them these things concretely, that you're not going to judge them, it's not a matter of punishment, it's not a matter of that you're genuinely there to help them and make their life easier, they may be more willing to listen. That's a very good advice, writing them a letter. It's easier for you to pour out your feelings and easier for them to read it. That's a good idea. Absolutely. Saying no is very easy, but taking time to do something fun with them, to bond with them outside of, all the directions you're giving them is going to be helpful too. Time out for both of you from all the lessons you're trying to teach and the decisions you're trying to make with them. Absolutely. Yeah. They'll break down eventually. We just have to be very patient. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.